I loved this episode of Ahsoka. I was grinning from ear to ear during almost every single second because it really did feel like my childhood was coming back to life. However, there is a caveat to that, because despite how much I loved it, I have a clash of heart and mind. My mind knows there was some issues with this episode, but even so, in my heart, I just couldn't help but love almost every moment and found a level of satisfaction from it that I haven't felt in a while. Now, there will be spoilers in this review, so you have been warned. The episode starts with Hera on Cetos, I believe it's called, and she's investigating the ruins from the previous episode for any kind of clue as to the whereabouts of Sabine and Ahsoka. She instead finds Hu Yang, who is peering off the edge of the cliff with Sabine's helmet in hand, lamenting that the two didn't stick together as he told them in the previous episode. Even though this moment was very brief and he's a droid, they actually managed to convey Hu Yang's sorrow in a very natural way, and I thought this was well executed. We then jump to the world between worlds with Ahsoka and Anakin. However, it's rather evident this isn't the world between worlds that we know it to be as the episode progresses. But for me personally, because this episode is quite fast-paced, it doesn't really allow Ahsoka any time to express her curiosity or her fascination with what's going on. There's very little depth to the dialogue that truly goes back and forth in a present sense, besides a little joke at the beginning about their ages, because Anakin almost immediately says, "I'm here to finish your training," and then bam, lightsaber fight. There was no real acknowledgement of where they were, or very much implication as to why this was happening. And it kind of uses the world between worlds setting as a ruse for the actual setting of the episode, which are the flashback sequences. But with that said though, the lightsaber fight was so much fun. The second Hayden Christensen started swinging that lightsaber around again, he embodied Anakin Skywalker in a way that we just haven't seen for 20 years. And additionally, the de-aging was almost perfect. Even though it was quite noticeable in last week's episode, for me it wasn't noticeable in this one at all. I also thought some of the camera work, especially within the world between worlds section of the lightsaber fight, was really, really good. And again, Hayden's performance, the way he fights is so powerful, but it carries such elegance. And instantly you are transported to the prequels era of lightsaber combat as soon as he starts moving. The way he moves feels fast yet visceral, and there's just something about him. He's just better than everyone else on the screen. We then jump back to Hera, who is with her son Jason, who is just kind of sitting on the edge of the cliff, taking in the sounds and the ocean, and he says to his mother that he can feel something in the water, and that he can almost hear the sounds of lightsabers. And although initially apprehensive, Hera stands next to him, and they listen together. They then both hear the sounds of lightsabers, and I wasn't sure if this was implying that Jason was kind of feeding the sound into her mind the way he was hearing it, or whether Hera was actually hearing the sound of lightsabers too. But this prompts Hera into believing that maybe Jason is right, and so she calls the X-Wings to do a sweep of the ocean, but to get lower so they can get a better reading and go searching for Ahsoka in the water. We then go back to the fight between Ahsoka and Anakin, and he seems to cut the bridge of the world between worlds, causing her to quite literally fall back into her past. There is this sort of cloudy, foggy location, and clones begin to run through the fog, and as Ahsoka rises, we realise that she is young again. I thought the actress that played young Ahsoka was brilliant. She embodied the character, she perfected the mannerisms in the same way that Rosario does. Anakin then comes out of the fog too, donning his armor from the Clone Wars with the shorter hairstyle, and he looked perfect. And young Ahsoka is kind of bewildered and confused. But to her, this whole moment feels as real as it gets, and so along with the clones and the walkers and Anakin, she charges along this beach. And this was my issue with the visual side of things. It could be that this whole sequence was shot in this foggy setting to kind of symbolize the idea that it was a dream. that it was hazy. However, something tells me this was actually just a limitation of the budget. They really obscured the environment and the battle, which I think was supposed to be Ryloth. The clones in the background, the gunships, the ATTEs, they were all kind of blurred, which is a shame because I would have loved to have seen the scale of this moment in its true grandeur. Now, does it detract from the overall moment? Not necessarily. Could it be symbolic? Absolutely, but it does lack a little bit of depth. In this moment, they're just kind of running across the beach as blaster bolts fly past their heads, and I think it would have been really good to have some battle droids in action, or battle droids being cut down, a little bit more brutality, more of the surroundings, but that is a personal issue. It then fades into another sequence where Ahsoka is in a kind of medical camp and she is holding the hand of an injured clone, whose face is, funnily enough, covered up, just like the rest of them. Again, I don't know if this was a budget issue, a scheduling issue, or a symbolic reason, but I do think they should have got Temuera Morrison in, even if it was just for a split second, to play the clones visually as well as just their voices. Because in this moment, Ahsoka is reflecting on the devastation and the death and the chaos that is being caused. And I feel like it would have had more depth, as I've said many times already, if Ahsoka was actually looking into the eyes of a dying clone, rather than just holding the hand of a clone with his face covered up. And this is a similar trend to the whole episode, really. There is so much good going on, but it just lacks a little bit of depth in certain aspects. Ahsoka and Anakin then have a character moment between one another, and this live-action iteration of Ahsoka does something so well that the cartoons, I feel, didn't really relay as well as it should have, and that is really showcasing just how young she is during this war. There was something about this moment in particular that really made it hit home, that Ahsoka was just a child soldier. Now obviously this is still very much the case in the cartoons, but seeing it in live action just makes it so much more hard-hitting for some reason. Anakin then tells Ahsoka that he is training her to survive, training her to be a warrior, and that she must always be ready to adapt to what is happening. Unlike the way that he was trained by Obi-Wan as a peacekeeper, she is being trained as a soldier, and that she cannot be afraid of making decisions or making mistakes, and she must live and evolve or die. I really did enjoy the dynamic between the young Ahsoka and Hayden Christensen. I thought they played really well off of each other. And then Anakin walks off into the fog, and this piece of cinematography is quite possibly my favourite shot of Anakin Skywalker ever. And its symbolism is so good too. Anakin walks through the fog with his blue lightsaber ignited, leading the charge, and he is surrounded by clones, but as the smoke gets heavier and the clones fade, the silhouette of Darth Vader appears and he is alone, surrounded by no one. It then reverts back to Anakin and you can vaguely see the clones surrounding him again, and I just thought this whole sequence was perfect. She then continues to move through her past, and it goes forward to the Siege of Mandalore. Again, visually they obscure everything with fog and smoke, which is a real shame. It just makes everything feel really small and narrow, which isn't the case because the Siege of Mandalore was sprawling and massive. Again, like I said, this could be symbolic in the sense that Ahsoka doesn't remember every little detail, hence the overall obscurity of the situation, kind of like a hazy dream. But I really do think they've done this so they don't have to detail everything visually, and so they can save on the budget. But either way, Ahsoka comes in and she has a small fight sequence with some Mandalorian super commandos. I really enjoyed the athleticism of Ahsoka and the way she fights here. It's a lot more acrobatic and true to the Ahsoka that we know from the Clone Wars. However, I thought the super commando looked terrible. It kind of looked like CGI and it looked like it was literally pulled from the Clone Wars. But despite that, we also got a small sequence with Captain Rex who looked exceptional in live action, so it's like yin and yang. As she's kind of standing there, taking in the moment, Anakin appears behind her, exclaiming that he didn't remember this battle, alluding to the fact that maybe this isn't just a dream and it is something more. Anakin at this point on multiple occasions alludes to things that Ahsoka wouldn't know, providing to that sort of vagueness that I spoke about earlier. He even kind of alludes to Luke when Ahsoka says that she doesn't want to fight him, the same way that Luke says it to him in Return of the Jedi. Ahsoka wouldn't know that, so I don't know if it is a dream or if it is supposed to be something more. Either way, here we have another great interaction between Anakin and Ahsoka, where he tells her by this point in her life she is the warrior that he trained her to be, and that she is everything he was and more. However, she recognizes that that is what she is afraid of. Anakin was more than a soldier. He was a bringer of death, darkness, and destruction, and that seems to be her legacy too. Anakin then says to Ahsoka that you have missed the entire point of this lesson, and so he embraces the dark aspect of himself and ignites a red lightsaber, telling her that she must live or die. The two then engage in another lightsaber duel, and there is some really nice shots here with some good choreography that has some small callbacks to Revenge of the Sith, which I liked, and Anakin then kicks her into the bridge of the world between worlds, and she reverts back to her current self. There is then another really good shot that I absolutely adored of Anakin walking through the hazy mist between the past and the present, and there is the breathing of Darth Vader and this kind of visual glitching of Anakin and Darth Vader, and as he taunts her, his voice is slightly mechanized, and I just thought this whole sequence was really cool. And the duel itself continues to be really fun, and it is probably one of the better duels in modern Disney Star Wars. Anakin then disarms Ahsoka, but she then reverses this and does a similar trick to him, and disarms him, and grabs his lightsaber and puts it to his throat. There is then this close-up of the red glow of the lightsaber on her eyes, again an exceptional symbolic shot of Ahsoka kind of fearing that she will become a reflection of Anakin. However, even though she's got the upper hand here and she doesn't really know what's going on, she doesn't choose to embrace that, and she instead chooses to throw the lightsaber away and exclaims that she chooses to live. Anakin then reverts back to Anakin. His eyes are no longer corrupted and he has a sense of, I don't know, like kinship and happiness on his face, and he basically says to Ahsoka, "You have passed the test." And as much as I loved Hayden's performances in the prequels, this was, for me, legitimately one of the best performances that he has ever given for Anakin Skywalker. The subtlety of his facial expressions in a variety of moments was so nuanced, but yet so powerful. The utilization of emotion in his voice, and also the way that he is trying to clearly embody the Clone Wars mannerisms of Anakin, while also ensuring that he stays true. The balancing of the two is just so expertly crafted, and it's just so good. Anakin then says there is hope for her yet, and then he disappears, and Ahsoka is then kind of symbolically baptized in the water, and she is dragged out by an X-Wing pilot and rescued. Now, as Ahsoka wakes up, she dons this new white outfit that we saw in Star Wars Rebels, which is interesting in terms of timelines and whatnot. But again, this is symbolism that she's kind of been baptized in the waters and she's become a sort of new version of herself, a purer and more refined version. But this massive revelatory moment was really quite abrupt, and I don't think it was really earned. While this dream sequence had a lot of messaging and there was a lot of different interpretations that could be taken from it, I didn't feel like it had enough depth on an emotional level, a psychological level, that really made Ahsoka look inwards enough to give her that sort of epiphany. Like I said, the pacing was quite fast, it was chopping and changing between different moments, and if I had my way in this situation, given that the overall show's pacing has been slow, it should have followed that cadence and had a real moment of reflection and dialogue-heavy exposition. This whole episode and this whole situation was so profound in so many ways, yet it just felt a little bit rushed at times. I just wish that it slowed down, even if it was for 10 or 15 more minutes, and we just had a moment akin to the moment in Return of the Jedi between Obi-Wan's Force Ghost and Luke, where it is just discussion, it's just dialogue, it's important character interactions that really push our characters forward on an emotional level, especially in regards to what is happening in the world around them and what's happened to them. I just think they were trying to do a little bit too much here in too little time. Anakin's lesson was so intentionally vague because it incorporated so many different core ideas in its message, and by the time its conclusion is reached, it just didn't feel like it had enough depth in its exploration and execution of those ideas for Ahsoka to reach said epiphany. Either way, it's revealed that the New Republic are on their way to come and apprehend Hera because after disobeying direct orders, they still have no proof of Admiral Thrawn, and so Ahsoka comes up with a solution that might be able to take them to the other galaxy. They then get into the starship and they fly up to the Purrgil in the sky, and Ahsoka then gets out of the starship and stands on the hull and communicates through the Force with the biggest Purrgil in the pack. Also, the Purrgil just looks so good in live action. The VFX on them is amazing. Additionally, at this point, Ahsoka is also noticeably more expressive. Again, this may allude to the fact that she's become a more open and refined version of herself after her epiphany. A purer version that is more akin to the younger, expressive Ahsoka that we all came to know. There was also a small interaction between her and Jason, with Ahsoka again being more emotionally expressive in a positive way, and he talks to her about how he could hear her fighting with a lightsaber through the Force, and that just adds a little bit more mystery and a lack of understanding of what was really going on in the bigger picture of this episode. However, I will be fair in saying that is generally a criticism of the episode alone, and that all of this may be expanded upon and given a lot more depth as the season continues. So I won't entirely judge it until we have the entire picture of the whole season. Anyway, I really thought the visuals and the cinematography of this entire scenario with the Purrgil was really good, and Huyang then guides the ship into the whale's mouth and sits on its tongue, and the New Republic fleet arrive. However, they are too late because all of the whales are starting to leave along with Ahsoka, and there is some really nice shots here of the whales weaving in and out between the capital ships that I really liked. And while they're waiting for the Purrgil to charge up their fleshy hyperdrives, Ahsoka kind of insinuates that she doesn't even know if the Purrgil are going to take her where they want to go. She just knows that going forward somewhere is a better option than doing absolutely nothing at all. And then the episode comes to an end. Now, despite this being a massive episode in so many ways, I'm still really invested in this show and the story they're trying to tell. There is still a lot of mystery and a lot of questions that have yet to be answered, and they've still got nearly 2 hours to do that, and so I'm really excited to see where they continue to take it. I think this episode had a lot of things that had unique artistic expressions versus things to generally criticize. There was a lot more in the way of symbolism that can be debated whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing for the story. But at the end of the day, it was full of mysticism, full of mystery. There was some epic visuals, some epic lightsaber fights, some really poignant moments for Ahsoka and for Anakin. Hayden put on one of his best performances for one of the most iconic characters in cinema history. It had some of the best visual shots of Anakin Skywalker ever. And for me, it was just a good embodiment of that George Lucas style of storytelling. Now, yes, it wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. At the end of the day, to me, it felt like pure Star Wars despite its weaker elements, and that just makes me happy. And when you consume media and you embrace these stories and these worlds, it's meant to bring you joy in whatever way you personally find that. And for me, Ahsoka so far is doing a really good job. Anyway, if you made it this far and you enjoyed the review, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal, and perhaps consider subscribing so you're notified for next week's review of Ahsoka when it goes live. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.